Hello everyone, back tuning into the 4th Autumn 2018 Analogues update. So we've done 3 updates so far for the Autumn 2018. This is our 4th update. We're going to have a look at 2 specific things actually for this update. So we're going to have a look at autumns that follow dry May and June combinations. And then we're going to have a look at the QBR. I'll talk you through that when we get through towards the middle part of the video. Another really balmy, hot summer night while I'm recording this autumn update. So last week I got a bit overheated, and by the end of the video I was feeling actually quite unwell. So I think that did come across in the video. So if anyone was a bit concerned, sorry about that. Just purely the fact that it's so hot in the room last week when I did the 3rd Analogues update, but I was feeling quite poorly by the end of that update. Hopefully this one will go better. It's been another very hot day though today, and it is really warm again here in Gav's Towers, or Gavsworthy's Towers. So you just have to bear with me if I start overheating again as we go along. You'll just have to bear with me. These late night recordings on such warm evenings are a little bit enduring, I have to say, but we shall see how we get on. Hopefully this one will go more smoothly than last week. Just to say that coming up later on today, we're going to have the we'll have the Gavsworthy's Sunday Roundup, so that will be coming up after lunch. It'll be your usual eclectic mix of this and that for your Sunday afternoon viewing pleasure. This video will be quite a long video as always with the seasonal stuff, so this will be placed on the Autumn Updates podcast page later on today with a written summary, just going over everything that we discuss in the video. I think that's pretty much everything that I've got to tell you. Just say big thank you again to James Ackrill, our Analogues guru, for coming up with the Analogues for this 4th Autumn 2018 update. And with that, I think we'll get on. So we're going to start off by having a look at autumns that follow dry Mays and dry June combinations, because we did have a pretty dry May across the UK, and we also had a very exceptionally dry June as well. So we're looking at May and June that comes out under 40 millimetres of rain for total England and Wales rainfall, and the autumns that follow them. And there aren't all that many of them, so again, what we see for 2018 has been a very unusual year throughout the year, really, and again, in terms of May and June rainfall, quite unusual what's happened. There aren't many years that have both seen May and June come out under 40 millimetres of rain for England and Wales total rainfall. Our first year that does it, though, is the year of 1868, and this is what the autumn looks like that follows this May and June of 1868. So this is how the autumn of 1868 looks. Remember, we can go back to 1850 with these Analogues charts at the moment. So for the autumn of 1868, we find that we have this area of above average heights to the north and the west, and then we get a big area of below average heights over the northwest of Europe. So it looks pretty wet, that, and quite cool as well. The winter, this year is cropping up a little bit in the Analogues this year. The winter of 1868-1869 is the warmest winter on record, but the autumn of 1868 actually looks quite cool and quite unsettled as well, with the flow and the jet doing something like that. So I would have thought we had all the cold weather quite early on through the autumn, and then the winter itself was very mild. Very unsettled autumn as well, with such a strong signal for below average heights. There would have been a lot of wet weather coming through with that. And then we've got the autumn of 1895. So again, this follows a very dry May-June combination in 1895. And this one completely different to 1868. This one has above average heights over much of central and southern Europe as well. Below average heights are in the Atlantic. And so the flow and the jet is going to something like that. Looks like a very quiet autumn, a lot of dry weather, and probably quite warm as well. I think September 1895 was a pretty hot month, pretty warm month, and generally it looks like a very quiet and mild autumn in 1895. 1919 comes up next. This is an interesting autumn. This was unusually cold autumn in 1919. Although it did start off with a very hot September, I think, but then it turned in the second half of September really cold, and the rest of the autumn was generally cold as well. So this one we have above average heights through the Atlantic up to Greenland, with below average heights over and to the east of the UK. The flow and the jet is going something rather like that. So we're on the cold side of the jet there, and that one's quite a cold autumn, quite an unsettled autumn, although we are blocking off the Atlantic, so not overly wet. But the main thing is that it is quite a cold autumn, to say the least, in 1919, after a very hot start. September 1919 is one of the most interesting Septembers of the 20th century. 1922 comes up next, so this one has a big area of below average heights again to the east and south of the country. Then we're blocking off the Atlantic, so we've got a ridge here out to the northwest of the British Isles, which leaves us doing something like that through the autumn of 1919. Probably quite a dry autumn, that one. Fairly cool, I would have thought, although we're not really tapping in to true Arctic air. With this one, we're not pulling the winds down from the North Pole as such. The wind and the flow and the air is probably coming from kind of like the North Atlantic, something like that. So probably quite a coolish autumn, pretty dry as well, I would have thought. Probably not very much going on actually in the autumn of 1919. A long run then to 1940, so have a long run of years where we don't have very dry May and June combinations. Then we get to 1940, which had a dry May and a dry June, and this is how the autumn of 1940 looks. Cold and unsettled really through this autumn, with below average heights through the UK and extending into central and southern parts of Europe as well. The flow and the jet doing something like that through the autumn of 1940. We're off to 1961 then, so again a long gap without any notably dry May and June combinations. This is how the autumn of 1961 looks. This one also looks quite wet. It's not cold, but it is wet, with below average heights generally over and just to the west of the country. The flow and the jet, therefore, is doing something like that. So probably quite a lot of warm weather through that autumn, but also very wet, particularly I would have thought late on. Through the autumn of 1961. Then we go to 1970. I think 1970 is cropping up quite a bit in the analogues at the moment for this autumn. So this is quite a mild, quiet autumn, really, with above average heights to our south, below average heights to the north, and the flow and the jet just comes through rather like that. So again, a fairly quiet autumn and quite mild, certainly not cold, through the autumn of 1970. And that's it. That's all of the notably dry May and June combinations. So not many to go. As I said, we only have within this analogues package 1861, I should say, 1895, 1919, 1922, 1940, 1961, and 1970. It's actually a very long time ago now that we had this combination of May and June coming out under 40 millimetres for total England and Wales rainfall. So I suppose you could say it has been a very long time coming. Surprised to see 1976 not within that analogues package, but there we go. So this is how all the Septembers of those sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years look. You've put them all together. This is how the signal looks for September, with a ridge generally centred across central parts of Europe, below average heights up to the north. The jet stream is still to the north of the country generally, and so therefore this is probably quite a mild, quite a warmish signal for these Septembers. Quite a bit of dry weather coming through here, and with the air coming up from kind of like Central Europe, I would have thought it could be quite warm as well. So maybe these Septembers do favour an extension of the summer. However, very, very different for October. Look at October, and it's a total flip around when we bring all of these years together. So for October, we get this very strong build of above average heights through the Atlantic and into Greenland. So that's proper sort of northern blocking. And then we get the below average heights across sort of Central Europe. And the flow on the jet is like that. So, I mean, if we have a delayed start to the autumn in what is probably favoured to be quite a warmish signal and driest signal for September, boy, does it get going in the autumn when you get through to the Octobers, because that's a really cold and wet signal for those Octobers. And then that's how the Novembers look. Very unsettled with the Novembers. Notice the blocking signal in the November is much less. We do still have a bit of a ridge to the south of Greenland. But the main thing with these Septembers is just this big area of below average heights that's centred over the UK. I don't think they're particularly favoured to be cold Novembers, you know, these, because I think the flow is probably quite sort of southwesterly there. So there's a little bit of a blocking signal to the south of Greenland, but the blocking signal is far, far weaker compared to what we have in the Octobers. October is a properly blocked, cold, wet signal. For the Novembers, yes, it's a little bit of blocking to south of Greenland, but the main thing is just a very unsettled pattern for the Novembers. So probably temperatures can be variable, but the main thing is that they are really quite wet Novembers. And then when you put it all together, this is how the overall sort of autumn analogue looks for these autumns that follow those notably dry May and June combinations. Remember, we've got the autumns of 1868, 1895, 1919, 1922, 1940, 1961, and 1970. And so the overall signal is for a bit of a blocking signal to be to the north with these autumns around Greenland and Iceland. A lot of that, however, is down to the October pattern. Remember, there's no real northern blocking signal at all in the Septembers, and the Novembers much reduced blocking signal as well. So that's primarily down to what's going on in the Octobers. But they do look very unsettled autumns with big area of below average heights covering virtually the whole of northern and Western Europe as well. So definitely a signal for being really unsettled, possibly quite wet autumns. But other than October, probably not overly cool signal. In fact, the Septembers, as I say, do look like they could be an extension of summer to some degree, so possibly favouring slightly warmer and drier conditions in the Septembers before there's a real flip to cold and wet in the Octobers. Right, so that's the first part of the video. I'm going to pause it there because I'm going to go get myself a cold drink. And so far, so good. Haven't got overly warm yet doing this video. So it's certainly nothing like I did last week. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go off and have a little drink of water just to make sure that I keep cool. And be back in a couple of minutes' time, and then we'll have a look at the QBO. And I'll talk you through that, because it's a little bit different to what we normally look at with the QBO. So I'll explain that when I've had a little drink of water. See you in around 2 seconds. Okay, we're back, and we're going to carry on now with our fourth autumn 2018 Analogues update. So far, so good, compared to last week's third Analogues update, which did become a little bit of a disaster as I overheated and was barely aware of what I was saying by the end of the video. So far, so good. It's all gone smoothly. So far. We're going to carry on by having a look at the QBO next, the quasi-biennial oscillation. We're not this week going to have a look at specific QBO state for the autumn. I think we'll probably do that next week. We'll probably have a look at either easterly QBOs next week, or possibly autumns that are transitioning. So there'll be either easterly autumn QBOs, or there'll be autumns that are transitioning easterly to westerly with the QBO. That'll be next week. What we're going to have a look at for this fourth Analogues update is autumns that follow a very negative QBO in June, because we have had a very unusually negative QBO number for June. So this chart here that we're looking at is every month's worth of QBO data going back to, we actually go back to 1948 with this, but I'm not sure how reliable it is, because negative numbers are easterly QBOs, and this is colour-coded. It's all put together by Analogues guru James, by the way, so big thank you to James for doing this. Must took a very long time to do it, but you'll see what is going on in 1948, 1949, and 1950. It looks like I have a continuous sort of easterly QBO going on over all of these years, and that does look a little bit strange. So I'm not sure how reliable this data is going back into the 1940s. So more reliably, I think we start this data around 1952 or 1953. If anybody knows whether that data with the QBO back into the late 1940s is reliable, I'd love to know. I think it looks a bit odd. But reliably we start at 1952, 1953. So easterly QBOs are blue. So for example, 1952 has an easterly QBO of these blue negative numbers. Goes on into 1953, for it goes a little bit positive for a time, a little bit westerly, therefore, which on this chart is colour-coded red. So that's a westerly QBO there, just a couple of months in 1953. But I have to wait until 1955, actually, before we get a proper westerly burst of the QBO. So 54 is an easterly QBO year. 55 starts easterly QBO, and then goes westerly, indicated by those red numbers, before we go back to easterly QBO again in 1956. And so the QBO is kind of like a seesaw, if you like. It's kind of like a pulse. It should be very regular. It should be a very regular thing, although it does occasionally go out of sync. We did have a situation a couple of years ago where we had a failure of the easterly QBO, just stayed in westerly QBO. That's very rare, very unusual. Generally, the QBO should wax and wane between easterly and westerly phases. But QBO is something particularly important for the winter. I think it's less important for the summer, most definitely. What the bearing is for the autumn, when you're transitioning from summer to winter, is a bit of a moot point, and it'll be interesting to see how the data stacks up with the QBO, and then how it eventually turns out for the autumn of 2018. Generally, a westerly QBO in winter is favouring sort of enhanced zonal westerlies. The QBO essentially is an index that's reflecting the strength of the zonal westerlies. So when you're in a westerly QBO, the zonal westerlies are strengthened, and that's particularly important for winter, because when you strengthen the zonal westerlies in winter, generally the UK and Northern Europe will be mild and wet. When you weaken the westerlies in winter, and that's what happens in the easterly QBO, a reversal of the zonal westerlies, if you like, so you weaken off the zonal westerlies. When that happens in the winter, then you can increase the chance of blocking, and it's a colder signal for winter, although there are many westerly and easterly QBOs that deviate from this. So you can get cold winters with westerly QBO, and you can definitely get mild winters with an easterly QBO. But as I say, for the autumn, what the effects of a QBO is, it's difficult to ascertain, but it is one of the things that we do look at for our analog. So we're just scrolling down through all of the years now. We're going to go through the 1970s there with the QBO, 1980s with the QBO just there, 1990s with the QBO just there. Interesting that even in the very warm decade of the 1990s, in terms of winters, I'll find a bit of a tangent on this, but it is interesting. I always think that the 1990s was a very, very warm decade for winters, had lots of very mild winters. But the QBO was actually going through its westerly and easterly phases, as you would expect. So a lot of those mild winters that occur in the 1990s are actually easterly QBO winters. So that just goes to show that it isn't at all the case that easterly QBOs go anywhere near to guaranteeing a cold winter. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent with that. Let's come back to autumn. We're going to carry on scrolling down through the noughties into the latest year. So that's 2010 just there. And of course, course, this is the year we're interested in right now, 2018. So let's look at 2017 first of all. We start off with a westerly QBO through 2017. That just there, by the way, back in 2016, that's the failure of the easterly QBO. So you see, but actually the way the data stacks up is that we have just a very, very long run of near continuous westerly QBO starting in the middle of 2015, this year just here, and going on into the first half of 2017. And just here, we should have started going from the westerly to the easterly QBO during the first half of 2016. These months just here started trending in that direction, but then in 2016 there was a failure. The QBO failed to go easterly, and the westerly QBO just carried on, which is very, very unusual indeed. But although the westerly QBO carried on into the start of 2017, it did eventually reverse easterly last year, so we finally had our first easterly QBO since 2015 in the second half of 2017. And we're still easterly with the QBO now. In fact, the QBO is trending more and more negative. So you'll notice for 2018, you've got these very negative numbers coming through. January, minus 19.02. February, minus 19.37. March, minus 19.77, April, minus 21.41, May, minus 24.23, and June, the most negative of all, at minus 28.45. That is exceptionally negative for the ECQBO, and that may well be as negative as it gets. From here, we might find that very, very gradually we begin to see the QBO not going westerly initially. It takes a little while to go from one phase to another, but we may well see that from June we start to back away from that very extreme negativity of the QBO, very extreme easterly QBO. May start to back away from that and begin to go, I say not initially westerly, but just begin to back away from that extreme negative easterly QBO. It might be towards the end of the year before the QBO begins to really start to move into its westerly phase from such a very negative number. So what we're going to look at for our second batch of analogues is autumns that follow very negative QBOs in June. So we're going to have a look. Our threshold of this is any June that has a QBO more negative than minus 20.0. So let's have a look at some of these autumns that follow very negative easterly QBOs in June. Our first autumn is the autumn of 1963. So obviously June 1963 must have had a very, very negative QBO indeed. The autumn of 1963 looks like that, with big area below average heights to the northwest of the country, and we bring the flow and the jet in from off the Atlantic. So it looks like it's quite an unsettled autumn, but it's also a very westerly autumn, so it's not cold. Remember, the first half of 1963 was exceptionally cold, particularly that winter, which is the coldest since 1740, winter 62-63. But by the autumn, actually, the westerlies are returning. So after the very negative QBO in June 1963, by the autumn of 1963, the westerlies are coming back. And so it's a relatively mild autumn, but probably quite a bit of rain at times. Our next very negative QBO in June is in June 1977. This is how the autumn of 1977 looks. It's the autumn where I was born, by the way. So we have below average heights up to the northwest, above average heights down to our south and southwest. The flow and the jet is like that. A lot of quiet weather through that autumn in 1977. And fairly mild autumn as well, not a particularly cold autumn, quite a mild autumn, and fairly quiet, particularly so down in the south. 1979 comes up next, so June 1979 must have again been exceptionally negative with that QBO in the June of 1979. This is how the autumn of 1979 looks, with, again, above average heights, very close to the country, below average heights to the northwest. The flow of the jets going to our north. So again, this looks like quite a mild autumn, follows a very cold winter of 78, 79, of course, quite a mild autumn in 1979, and a lot of quiet weather coming through as well. That's the autumn of 1987. Some very different years showing up with these particular analogues compared to any of the analogues that we've looked at so far through this season of autumn updates. So this is how the autumn of 1987 looks, with, again, below average heights out to west of the country and above average heights to the south and to the east. The flow and the jet is going something rather like that. So once more, you'd expect quite a mild autumn there, with unsettled weather at times. The weather's driving in off the Atlantic, so there would be some bouts of rain at times. But the main signal is that overall, again, another pretty mild autumn in 1987. Then we're up to 1994, and again, this has a rather strong signal for above average heights to be quite close to the country after the exceptionally negative June QBO in 1994. That's how the autumn looks. Again, a bit of a signal for above average heights to be across the country. There was a wet September in 1994, but October and November were quieter, and it did become exceptionally mild as well by November 1994. 2001 comes up next, so this one has a signal for above average heights to be over and to the west of the UK. So again, anticyclonic signal. A lot of these autumns are looking pretty dry, I have to say, in complete contrast, interestingly, to the autumns we looked at with the first batch of analogues into today's autumn update. So completely different analogues here for these autumns. Below average heights are to the north. The flow of the jet is coming through rather like that. There's an exceptionally mild October in 2001. It was also quite wet. Otherwise, September and November were relatively cool and quite dry as well. So that was quite an interesting autumn. 2005 comes up next. We haven't seen this at all, I don't think, in the analogue so far this year. It has a strong signal for above average heights to be over and to the east of the country. Below average heights are up to the north, with the flow and the jet going through something rather like that. So a lot of dry weather in the autumn of 2005, and also a very mild autumn as well. It was really warm in September and October 2005. And then, I'm sure most people watching this will remember, very mild conditions continued into the first half of November 2005 before there was a dramatic flip in the final sort of couple of weeks of November 2005, but it turned very cold for a time. Then we've got 2007. This one has above average heights out to our west, in that kind of position, below average heights up to the north. So very strong signal here for high pressure to be quite close to the country through these autumns, varying in the exact position of the high pressures, but it is really quite a strong signal. Now, this one's very different. Look at this. This is 2010 turning up. So it starts getting a lot more interesting now, doesn't it? Because this one has this big area of above average heights blocking around Greenland. It has the big trough of below average heights to the south. And so we do something like that with the flow and the jet. It's an autumn that is near normal in September. There's a fairly average September for the period, though. Actually, that's quite a cool September. Becomes progressively colder, though, through the October and the November. Of course, we finish up with a tremendous freeze when we get to the end of November 2010, and that heralds the December to remember. And then the final year that has a very negative QBO in June is 2012, and again another interesting year. So the last two, 2010 and 2012, do give us a little bit more interest, with below average heights through the UK. This is a wet autumn with above average heights in the Atlantic. The flow of the jet is going through rather like that. This is one of the few cool autumns that we've had over the past decade, and also the thing, this autumn is also a very wet autumn as well in 2012. So let's put it all together then. Let's put all those years together and see how the autumn and the autumn months come out. This the years in this Analogues package are 1963, 1977, 1979, 1987, 1994, 2001, 2005, 2007, 2010 and 2012. September looks like that when you put all those years together, with above average heights close to the country, a little bit to the west-southwest, below average heights to the north. The flow and the jet comes through rather like that. So fairly quiet signal really in the Septembers. I think this particular Analogues package does favour reasonably dry Septembers. The Octobers look like that. So we get below average heights out to the west of the country, with above average heights to the east and the northeast. The flow and the jet goes through like that. So we pull the winds up from a southerly direction. You would expect these to be generally quite dry and fairly warm. October, I would have thought. They could be cool if you bring in an easterly wind. But to me, the way the trough to the east and then the ridge to the west are aligned, it looks like they're probably more southerly to southeasterly with the wind. So relatively warm in the Octobers. And then the Novembers look like that. And that could be a bit of a colder signal in the Novembers, with the above average heights just that little bit out to the west-northwest of us. The below average heights are generally over Scandinavia. So that's a colder signal in the Novembers, after what will probably be quite dry and mild conditions in the Septembers and Octobers. In terms of the autumn overall, look at that, it's totally different, these autumns, to the analogues we looked at in part 1 of this video, with a signal for above average heights with these autumns to be very close to the UK. Below average heights are up to the north. The jet stream is up to the north. Let's get rid of that. The jet stream is up to our north as well. And so overall, you do favour pretty dry, quiet and mild autumn conditions with these autumns when you put everything together. As I say, next week I think we will look at, or try to look at, the autumns that are either just, again, strong, mature, easterly QBO autumns, or are transitioning from easterly to westerly. So, for example, 1963, which we just looked at, we may find some of the years cropping up again in next week's update. But for example, 1963 does do that from the summer through to the autumn. We do get that transition going on from a easterly to a westerly QBO through the autumn. So that's the kind of thing we'll be looking at next week, or in the next Analogues update. Anyway, I think we'll do one next week, but it'll be what we look at in the next Analogues update, the 5th Analogues update anyway, which could be a follow-on, if you like, from today's update. Right, so I think that all went okay. I haven't totally lost the plot of what I've been trying to say. So I've been able to talk as normal. I've gone on for 33 minutes. I don't feel unwell, so that's definitely a bonus compared to last week. It is very warm here in the room, so I'm going to wind the video up now and go and get myself another cold drink. And just say this video will be placed on the autumn 2018 updates and forecast page later on today. There'll be a written summary that goes with it as well, just going over everything that we discussed. And later on in the day, we're going to have the Gazza This Sunday Roundup, your usual eclectic look at this and that for your Sunday afternoon viewing pleasure. But coming up for 34 minutes, that's all for now, and thanks for watching.